Hi and welcome to this Blender tutorial series, and this time we are looking at tracking in Blender and how to do 2D and 3D tracking. Now in this first episode I'm going to just look at single point tracking, which is the primary method for 2D tracking. And to get a bit of an idea, I've made this mock-up of a video clip which is exactly as your camera would see it on your screen in your software. And 2D tracking takes the values of the height and the width of the video, and on each point it assigns them an axis, which is the X and the Y. And 2D tracking, there is no depth because everything is on a flat plane, exactly as it is seen through your camera. So with 2D tracking we would generally take a point and reference the position of the movement of the camera or the object within the scene that we wish to track, whether that's a moving part of your body or a car or whatever. It could be this helicopter. If the helicopter was taking off, we could track the helicopter, or we can track a point in the scene and get the information of the actual movement of the camera, which for this mock-up is what I'm going to show you. So 2D compositing requires layers, so if I put in a couple of layers, you can see we just have two images which are also 2D images, obviously, because they're just photographs, and they are just layered on top of the actual film clip. And through looking through the camera and the perspective of each image, it looks like they are supposed to be in the scene. Now as you play through the scene, you'll see that nothing happens, so this is why we need to track. And if you look in the background, you can see I have an empty which is pinned to this tree to represent the tracking of the scene. So if I go back to the start, now I can select these objects and select the empty. I'm going to use the outliner because it's easier to grab that empty. And if I Control P, set parent to objects, now both those objects are parented to the point of what we have tracked. So if I play through now, you can see the objects remain in position and move alongside with the movie clip. Right, so it's not very good, they're a bit slidey, but you get the point. So let's go do an exercise. We will take a look at parenting a 3D object into a 2D scene, and to do that let's go now into our tracking scene. Okay, in a new version of Blender, let's open up our motion tracking window by going to the workspace layout and choosing motion tracking. As this is designed for beginners, we're just going to do a quick tour of the workspace. At the top we have a dope sheet which allows us to track our keyframes. We have a view of the 3D space, and we have a graph editor which allows us to see the progress of the track in real time. Main workspace, which is where we're going to be doing all the work. And as you can see, we have only a grease pencil, and our tool set will appear as soon as we open the film clip. So let's do that now. Just click open, and I'm using this clip of myself. Let's scroll out. Now this clip is just me waving my hand about, and the first few frames are me setting up the camera, so we don't need those, so we can delete them, but we only go up to frame 250. And on the right side now we have our toolbar. You can see under our first set of clips we have set scene frames, so we'll click that straight away, and you can see we now have the full length of our clip on our timeline. If I click through, you can see me in my kitchen, and I will just wave my hand around. It's a little bit slow. And I make a couple of attempts at this in the video just to find a scene that I like. And the clip that I'm going to use is going to start on frame 849. So if I go to my start, press 849, and that trims the clip to where I want my actual effect to begin. Stick that there, come on, there we go. And then it finishes around here. And I'm just going to find the spot where it finishes. And the reason for that is because we haven't cached the video into the RAM, and we're going to do that in just a second once we've found a decent spot. Okay, so here I am just about finishing the movement. My arm has gone down. The effect that I want will have disappeared. So I can trim the clip there. And if I hover my mouse over the timeline and press E, that will end the clip. And now we have only the frames that we need to track in our scene. So now if we go back to the clip and we press this prefetch button, this is going to calculate all the images of the film clip and put them into the RAM. This might take a little while because I'm using my laptop and recording on the screencast as well. There we go, it's starting to prefetch. And this purple line, you can see the progress of the file that has been cached into RAM. And I'm going to pause the video and let it do that. Alright, now that everything is cached into the system's RAM, you can see this bar has become a solid purple colour, and now if we play through, it should play at a reasonably normal speed. And that's it. Now I have on my hand here a dot which I have painted on in order for Blender to track. Now if we go back a few frames, you can see that that tracking point has disappeared, and that's due to motion blur, and we're going to need to compensate for that when we add our tracker. So let's go back to the first frame, and under marker we have the add button which will add a tracker onto our scene. Detect features is used for 3D tracking, as it will place markers all over the scene according to where Blender thinks that it can hold a track. The tracking settings, we have these presets for blurry footage, the default setting, fast motion and a planar tracking. And in this one we're going to use fast motion, and we're going to take the motion model of location and rotation and just switch it back to location, because we don't need to use any of the rotation information on the screen because the camera itself is not rotating, and we just want a simple pin for our 3D object. I've got normalize checked, which will adjust the algorithm to accommodate any changes in light. There isn't actually any changes in this image, so I can uncheck that, and that will just help speed up the process a little bit. We will go into more about these settings in their own video when they become more appropriate, but for now let's just get in and add a tracking marker. If I click add, you can see nothing happened, but if I go to the point I want to track and press the button, you can see my marker has appeared. Now I have the search radius enabled, which is under the marker display. You can deactivate any of these tracking points information as you wish, depending on how distracting you're finding them. But for this video we're going to leave the search area and the pattern area on. Now this small box is the pattern, and the pattern is what Blender will look for in each frame. So as we move forward frames, you see how the tracking point moved. So as I've moved my hand, Blender still wants to pin this center point to this dot, and now as it's moved outside of the pattern, it's moved into the search area, so Blender is looking for this image inside this area. So if I press G and move it over, that is basically what's going to happen. Automatically on each frame, Blender will find the pattern and move the point appropriately. Okay, so let's go back to the first frame, and you'll see that the point that we want to track is off the dot. So if I just press my left mouse button in this area, I can drag it into place. You'll see the tracker moves to correspond to that. Now if I'm having trouble getting it on, I can just hold down Shift and that will smooth the movement and make it a little bit easier to place. Yes, you can join the Blender VFX crew, but not just right now. Okay, once the marker is in place, we need to look at what it is actually being seen, because Blender is going to look for this in each track. And as I explained before, the motion blur is going to blur this out, so it will no longer see this dot, it will only see the pink. And when that happens, Blender will have nothing to discern against anything within this hand. So it will lose the track, and sometimes it will just not lose the track, it will just jump to a different part of the hand and be confused, and we will get a really bad track. So in order to get the best chance of having the point tracked, we're going to scale up the pattern, that's S, just as you would any other thing in Blender. And now you can see the hand is a much better pattern, it has something to recognise on each frame. The search area is quite big, so we can take this triangle here, just scale the pattern area down to a more appropriate size. This button here allows us to move the whole of the pattern area, but we don't need to use that on this frame. We want, because we are moving in a circular direction, we will use all of the search area. So now that we've got it in place, you'll notice that the tracking point is really quite large, and this is going to cause not so much a problem, but it will take a lot of resources to work out what is going on, and that's going to slow down our tracking quite considerably. But not to worry, as we are only doing one track, it doesn't really matter that it's going to take a while. If we were doing 30 or 40 tracks, we might want to change our approach, because we don't want to spend the next 2 weeks just doing basic tracking. But for one point it's fine, and we are going to scroll down here to the track buttons. Now we have some simple play buttons. The ones with the little line by them indicate one single frame, so if I click that, Blender will track forward by one frame. Now you can see it's having to think about things. The little round button is going, and this is what I was talking about. Because we have such a large search area, it's going to take time for each frame to calculate. Now you see we have a little dot that is red, and that's the previous frame position of the tracking marker. And if we find on here on our graph, you can see for the first frame we have some movement, a little bit on the x-axis and not so much on the y-axis. So now we've tracked forward one point, let's hit the track. We'll track the entire clip, and we have a progress bar now, and it's unknown time remaining, so we will just sit back and relax and wait for that to go through. It's actually going quite quickly for the first few frames, but as soon as it moves we are going to lose that track. And surprisingly, see, Blender's lost the track and it's pinned itself to a point that is completely off what we were looking for. However, I am surprised it made it all this way through. However, none of that is what we want, so we need to go in and clean up our track and do it again. So if we come to our timeline, and if we press L, that will lock the track into the centre of the screen, so we can scroll in. Now we can scrub forward through our timeline until we start to lose the track. And as you can see from about here, we start to be moving off the centre. So if we press G, just move the track point. Then we can try tracking forward again. Go frame by frame, and we will just carefully watch what's going on inside this pattern, making sure as we move we are not getting too far off this dot. And I know the dot is here, so I'm going to press G and just move that back there, back up a couple of frames. That's it, we seem to be going fine there. So let's get back to this point. So 1, 2, 3 frames forward. And then we can start tracking forward again. And you can see as we track forward, Blender is adjusting its position. So this track should jump down here now. And as you see it does, it's correcting itself as we go along. Just carefully, and now you can see we are sliding off to the left. So I'll press G again and just move it back into the center and continue to track forward. We've slid down again, so move it back to approximately where the marker should be. Just being mindful. And with this kind of thing, it's not too important to have it exact. A little bit of sliding will be okay. As it won't be too noticeable with the final effect. But if you were to put in a solid object, you would want this point to be as solid and in the correct position as possible. Now I think I can see my point there, so I'm going to move that up a little bit. Just track it backwards, 1, 2, and then move forwards again. By moving forward on the timeline, it doesn't actually track the footage, it just moves along the path to where it was. Only these buttons will actually cause Blender to do any tracking. So if I was to go forward from this point, you'll see we just follow the path to where it's jumped, whereas if we track forward, it actually recalculates the tracking path. So now if we continue to go up, we should be finally coming back to approximately the place where we started. And we should start to see our tracking dot coming back into focus. And there it is, and you can see we are slightly off there, so I'm going to pin us in place on that one and track it backwards for a few frames. It seems we were quite a way off. Hopefully we will smooth it out. And that small kink there, I think we can get away with. Alright, so let's bring it back. And that's where it's jumped, so go back 1 frame. And now we should be able to complete the track on that point. And if we just press track forward, and it will automatically finish. I'm just coming to the end of the track now, and just having to think about things again because the tracker has suddenly disappeared on that frame. It should pick it up again any second. No, it's jumped miles away onto the wall as we start to close our hand. So now we need to manually think about where the tracker could be for those last few frames. So let's go back there, find where it ended, and we track forward 1 more. it's going to break down. So now we can press G and move the point back to about where the tracking point should be, which is in the middle of the hand, so about there. Now rather than trying to process the track again, which is taking time, we can move one frame forward, bring the tracker down to where we think the point should be, so it's about there in the center of the palm. Go forward one frame, we just continue like this until we have the point done. Now by this point our effect should have ended, so we can come over here and we can go to this clear, and this one will clear everything before the current frame, so that will clear out all the tracking that we have done so far. The next one will clear out all the information after this tracking point, so that's the one we're going to click. Don't click this one, otherwise it will wipe out everything that you have done so far. You don't want to do that. So now that we have our track, I just want to come to this frame and see where this dip is inside, and that's where we went back to, that's that little dip. So if I press Control up arrow on the graph, I can take this point and just G and move it up slightly. Take this one, move it down slightly, and then go back to our frame, and you can see we have smoothed out that particular curve a little bit. Go back one frame. And we can just use the graph and the keyframes just to smooth out any imperfections in our path. Looks like there could be another slight imperfection there, so I'll just move that down a little bit. There we go. And that looks a lot better. So you can see, you can use the graph just to make small adjustments to the path. And now that we have that, we should have a perfect-ish track. Let's go back to the first frame, and with it locked in position, if we press Alt-A, now we should see this tracking point staying relatively smoothly in the point where we want it. And I think that's good enough. There we go. Now all we need to do is get that information into our 3D space. To do that, for a single point track is very simple. You just go to Reconstruction and you say Link Empty to Track. We do that, and now we can head back to our default workspace, and you can see our camera has a tracking point, has an empty attached to it. We can delete this cube, let's get rid of that so we can see, and the camera itself hasn't been adjusted or anything, so the first thing we want to do is clear out any rotation on the camera, so Alt R, and then we can Alt G to center it, and then we can now position the camera in an appropriate position. So RX 90, that will put it so it's facing forward. Now if we GY2, that moves it forward, so -2, that moves it back 2 spaces, move that back. As you can see, the empty stays in position while the camera moves out of the way. So if we move that back about 4 spaces, should be enough. Now if we press Alt A in the camera, you can see the empty is moving around. And if we look down from the top by pressing 7, you can see the empty remains exactly on this plane, on this x-axis, and it just moves from side to side. It does move down a little bit, but essentially it remains on the same plane, and that's what we mean by 2D tracking. Doesn't matter how much movement is in the scene, this empty will always remain along this point. So now we need to see what we're doing, so let's put in our background image. So if we scroll down to background images, turn that on, click add image, all views, camera view, select movie clip, choose camera clip, turn that off, and then we can select the movie from the drop down menu, and now there we go. Opacity, let's put it up to full so we can see what we're doing. Select the empty so it's highlighted, Alt A, and we should see the empty following our hand. Just let that play through for a moment. There we go. And now anything we add to this empty will move as if it's pinned to our hand. So let's do that. The best way to do it is to put the cursor in the same place as the empty. So we have the empty highlighted. So Shift S, cursor to selected, and now Shift A, add mesh UV sphere. We can scale that mesh down so that it fits in the palm of my hand. And now if I press Alt A, you'll see nothing happens, because we need, that's off center, so let's try that again. Shift S, cursor to selected, select the sphere, Shift S, selection to cursor. Now it's in my hand, but we need to connect this sphere to the empty, so we'll, with the sphere highlighted, press Shift, select the empty, Control P, set parent to object. And now when we play through, the sphere is connected to my hand as if I'm holding it there, which is great. So we can now add our special effects. Go back to the first frame and go to Object, Quick Effects, and Quick Smoke. And now you can see Blender has added a domain object. If we go to our settings, select the sphere, switch from smoke to fire and smoke, go back to the first frame, press play. At first nothing happens, so we need to cache the data from there. So select the domain, go to smoke cache. You'll see it's all greyed out, so we need to save our Blender file. So File, Save As, save the Blender file, and then we can press play. Still nothing, and we need to change the cache to the same start and end point of our film clip, so 845 to 1019, 845, 1019, and then tell it to bake. We'll just give that a few moments. It is going quite quickly, which is surprising for a smoke sim, but then we are only using the tiniest resolution. Let that run through for a second. Okay, perfect. So now it should work. There we go. Now we have a flame. And it horrendously follows our hand, but you get the idea. So if we free up that bake, and increase the sample to say 64. Now you can see that the flame is a lot better, but we are slower with what's going on. But you can see the more we increase the resolution, the better the effect is going to start to look. Okay, go back to the start, increase the resolution to 128. Try again, and now it's going to think about things for a lot longer. So if I stop it there for a second, go back and click adaptive domain, that should make it go a little bit faster. There we go. Now if we were to parent, for example, some obstruction objects in the position of my fingers, you would see the flame wrapping around my fingers and it would look more realistic. But as you can see, we are getting some much more interesting results. And then for our final render, we can check the smoke high resolution domain and do some more tweaks to make it look how we want. And then we can just render that out and the job will be done. Now let's just stop that. And so I think you can see how simple that is for adding objects. I mean, you could use an image with a special effect on there. For example, if you had a flame visual effect sequence, you could place that on there, but obviously you wouldn't get the dynamic movement of the flame being moved around. So for this reason, it's often a lot better to be using a simulation like this. And that's pretty much it. I mean, there are more uses for single point tracking, like camera stabilization or nailing images, pinning things to the wall. It doesn't have to be pinned onto moving items. And if you check out the website, you will see a different example of how to use this one-point tracking. So that's all there is to it for single point tracking. In our next lesson we will be looking at 2-point tracking and seeing how effective that can be for simple scenes. Until next time, why don't you check out the website and have a read through of the information there. These blend files will be available for all our Patreon supporters. Obviously you can download the video clip from our website for use to follow along. So until next time, thank you and good night.